sacrifice and the killing of the innocent to punish the guilty. In the New, Jesus stridently opposes family unity, and God kills a man and wife for cheating on a promised gift to the church. A sensible reading of the Tanakhic genocidal texts is that they reflect no divine mandates, but rather the convenient rationalizations of a nascent insurgent Israelite nation seeking to define itself and its place in history through campaigns of conquest, seeking, as men always have, power, wealth, and territory. This is plausible. What better justification than to cloak perfidy in the mantle of divine approval? Why should we expect from a repeatedly wayward Israel anything less? But what are the consequences? If that is plausible, surely it is also plausible that Israel's self-understanding, inherited by Christianity, as a people specially chosen by God, is equally a self-justifying rationalization, one available to defend virtually any transgression so long as directed against outsiders. Clearly, a proper discussion of the horrors would have to tackle some hard and complex questions of interpretation of relevant texts, questions of authorship, date of composition, redaction, history, language, Sitz im Leben, etc., and require discussion within the larger context in which the passages appear. That would entail nothing less than a book, or several. Here, I'm unavoidably forced to pluck examples from the text, largely ignoring hermeneutical issues. Still, it is hard to see how interpretive maneuvers can remove the stench of moral outrage without sacrificing much that Christians typically hold dear. To indicate the sort of question we face, let me indulge with all due apologies in a modern-day fantasy to help fix intuitions. The scene is contemporary America. Mormons, ever eager to bring others into the fold, decide to use their married women to engineer a hostile but wily religious takeover of Southern Baptists. Mormon women being cleverly seductive, and Baptist men being, as they regularly claim, prone to sins of the flesh, the plot begins to succeed. And, as Baptists tell the tale, the Lord's response is, first, to wipe out 24,000 Baptists by visiting upon them a rabies epidemic, and second, to incite the remaining Baptists to rise up and engage in wholesale slaughter of the Mormons, reserving only their virgin daughters to be raised as breeding stock. What judgment shall we render? Were the story true, what should we think of the Baptist Lord? And if false, what would it nevertheless tell us about the moral sensibilities of Baptists, or the likelihood that they understood the will of a morally perfect God? With these considerations in mind, let us turn to the slaughter of the Midianites recounted in Numbers 25 and 31. They provide Moses with safe harbor when, having killed a man, he flees Egypt. Jethro, Midian's priest, gives Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. But when Israel encamps with them en route to Canaan, it's held against the Midianites that their comely maidens begin dating good Jewish boys, thereby apparently fueling divided religious loyalties between Yahweh and Baal of Peor. It's hard to tell whether the more serious sin is miscegenation or its alleged consequence, apostasy. The immediate result is bloodshed and a plague that kills 24,000 Israelites. That is not revenge enough. God ultimately orders the slaughter of all Midianites except, with palpable irony, the Midianite maidens who are to be taken as concubines. And I quote from Numbers 31, 7-18. They warred against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and slew every male. And the people of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their little ones, and all their cities they burned with fire. Moses said to them, "Have you let all the women live? Behold, these caused the people of Israel by the counsel of Balaam to act treacherously against the Lord in the matter of Peor. And so the plague came upon the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, Kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Let us pray. It's hard to know what to make of such morally horrific depictions of Yahweh, with which many books of the Tanakh are saturated. I cannot conceive of any defensible apologetic strategy that exonerates Yahweh, short of denial that these stories, and presumably by extension much of the context in which they are embedded, fall short of divine inspiration. It won't do at all to suggest that, as is likely, the genocidal invasion of Canaan didn't really occur with such ferocity and success. For the attribution of the genocidal commandments to Yahweh betoken a religious sensibility impossible to square with the view that Israel was in intimate and comprehending concourse with an impeccable God. If they were not, even on matters as critical as this, what are we to think of their other theological claims? And why, knowing as he must have what calamitous mischief latter-day Jews and Christians would justify by citing such passages, to say nothing of the mea culpa of Matthew 27:25, also historically doubtful, why would a loving God permit such language to be preserved for posterity in Holy Writ? Richard Swinburne defends adoption of the Tanakh into Christian canon by the early fathers on the grounds that, troubled as they were by these things, they found figurative interpretations of the offending passages. But this, besides significantly oversimplifying early Christian attitudes, is irrelevant. Even granting, as I do not, that by understanding the horrors of the Tanakh allegorically, the early church was able to wash its hands of moral complicity, there remains the point that these passages, also ones from the New Testament, have been used with effect and color of reason to justify slavery, crusades, pogroms, witch hunts, the treatment of women and children as near chattel, and much other evil. Any reasonably astute human being could have foreseen this. So therefore could God have. One snare that bedevils the apologete who takes the stories of Israel's genocidal warfare against not only Midian, but most of the tribes of Canaan more or less at face value, is loss of moral bearings. To take just one modern example, consider William Craig's response to the difficulties posed by the divine command to treat most Canaanite peoples as cherem, to be wiped out. Craig offers these mitigating considerations. One, the adult Canaanites deserved to be slaughtered because their culture was, quote, debauched and cruel, unquote, engaged in temple prostitution and child sacrifice. Two, moral duties derive from divine commands. Since God does not issue commands to himself, he violates no duty in demanding the lives of the Canaanites. He has the right to take anyone's life whenever he sees fit. Three, it is morally permissible, indeed obligatory, for human beings, for example, Israelite soldiers or Abraham, to obey God by committing what ordinarily would be murder, but ceases to be murder if God commands it. Four, God was justified in utterly destroying the Canaanites by the need to remove from Israel the temptation to follow Canaanite ways. Indeed, the slaughter of Canaan's children, quote, served as a shattering, tangible illustration of Israel's being set exclusively apart for God, unquote. Five, the apparent injustice of slaughtering children is removed when we consider that God, extending his grace to them, could provide for them a heavenly home, so that death was no tragedy but a great benefit to them. I'll discuss these points in order. So first, there is historical evidence that some Canaanites did engage in one practice Craig mentions, though for Israel to level such accusations sounds like the pot calling the kettle black. No matter, the question is whether the Canaanites collectively deserved extinction on that basis, and whether each and every adult Canaanite deserved the fate of death. And that is utterly implausible. A contemporary equivalent would be George Bush's rationale for the invasion of Iraq, had he further averred that all Iraqis deserved to be slaughtered. A principle of collective responsibility that reaches such a conclusion condemns itself. Second, Craig accepts a voluntarist version of the divine command theory of moral obligation. I take that to be a reductio of the view. And indeed, Craig seems uncomfortable with its implications. Thus, he reverts to asking whether it would be consistent with God's good nature to command genocide. Hence, the attempt to justify the slaughter. But, third, which is it? Is the Israelite genocide and, for example, Abraham's binding of Isaac justified by the very fact that God has commanded these things? Or must God have morally competent reasons for doing so? Or did God command murder?